So a no-fault divorce is a divorce where you don't have to prove fault in order to get divorced. That's kind of an interesting thing because it's not at all what people think. People tend to think, at least the people we talk to, that a fault divorce or a no-fault divorce is really about whether or not someone gets more or less of the assets based upon like their bad behavior, let's call it, right? Abandoning their spouse. If I prove that you abandoned me, I get more of the assets. If you prove that I committed adultery, you get more of the assets. It's actually not what no-fault divorce and fault divorce means at all. Really what it refers to is what you need to prove in order for a Connecticut judge to have the authority to grant a divorce. So let's play this out. The reason the vast majority of divorces in Connecticut aren't fault divorces. The reason the vast majority of divorces in Connecticut are no fault divorces is because most people who file for divorce actually want to be divorced at the end of the divorce. In order to get a no-fault divorce in Connecticut, in other words, in order for a judge to have the authority to order that divorce, when it's a no-fault divorce on no-fault divorce grounds, all that needs to happen is one of the two spouses says that the marriage has broken down irretrievably with no hope of reconciliation. That's it. You don't have to prove that someone did something bad, was at fault, in order for the court to grant your divorce. So, most people want to know that at the end of the divorce, they're actually going to be divorced. They don't want to have a whole divorce trial where they're trying to prove their spouse's bad behavior. And then if the judge is like, I'm just not sure that that's what caused the breakdown of the marriage, I don't have the authority to grant your divorce. So after all that, you're still married. Most people, hard pass. It used to be the case that in order to get a divorce, you had to actually prove a fault. So no-fault divorce is actually relatively new, that there's a way to get divorced just by saying, my marriage has broken down and there's no hope of us getting back together. That's new. That's a modern concept. It's actually pretty hard to believe. It used to be really hard to get the state to let you get unmarried. Happily now, we have the right to not have to be married to someone we don't want to be married to. That's really what no-fault divorce is. If you no longer want to be married to someone, no one's going to make you stay married to them. All you have to do is say under oath, this marriage has broken down irretrievably and there's no hope of reconciliation. Now, I made that sound a little easy, right? Like that's all you have to do. It's all you have to do in order to have a judge have the authority to grant your divorce, to dissolve your marriage. But you still have to do a lot of other things in a no-fault divorce. You have to put on evidence so that the court knows how to divide property, so that the court knows whether there should be alimony and how much. If you have children, you have to work through parenting and custody and all of that stuff, child support. There are a lot of really important issues that happen in no-fault divorces too. No-fault divorces, in that respect, are just as complex as a four-fault divorce. But when it comes to the core of the difference between no-fault and four-fault, the grounds of the divorce, you will be divorced at the end of the divorce in a no-fault divorce. So a fault-based divorce is, surprise, the opposite of a no-fault divorce. What you have to do in a fault-based divorce is in order for the judge to have the authority to dissolve your marriage, you have to prove that one of the two spouses engaged in the bad behavior and that it caused the breakdown of the marriage. So you have to affirmatively prove The for fault grounds are things like abandonment, adultery. You have to affirmatively prove that that happened, and that's why your marriage ended. And so what's so scary about a for fault divorce and why so many people opt for a no fault divorce is that you could go through a whole divorce trial trying to prove this bad behavior that caused the end of the marriage. And if the judge doesn't see it your way, you're still married. So, downside to a for fault divorce, you can still be married at the end of the divorce process. You would have to do another divorce, probably on no fault grounds, and start over. This is a real deterrent for folks. So in the vast majority of cases, we file no fault divorces. Doesn't mean that everyone behaved perfectly. It doesn't mean that there weren't things that contributed to the breakdown of the marriage. All of that can be true. And to a certain extent, it might come in a little bit on how property is divided or how and whether alimony flows. But the main point of what a no-fault divorce is about the grounds. A for-fault divorce is about the grounds. In order to actually have a court order the divorce, do you have to prove fault or do you not have to prove fault? One misconception is also that legal separation is a much easier process than a divorce, and that you should do it if you want a process that's less acrimonious, faster, less expensive. And I think it may be true in some states, but it's not true here in Connecticut. Let me tell you a little bit more about why. The difference between a legal separation and a divorce is just that at the end of a legal separation, you're still married, and therefore you can't remarry, right? That's it. That's the only distinction. So if we file for a legal separation, you still have to work through alimony. You still have to work through property division. You still have to work through parenting and custody. You still have to work through child support. You have to do all of the things that you have to do in a divorce. And then at the end of it, you're still married and you can't remarry. So let's talk a little bit about why people do that. It used to be very common for some health insurance to continue if you were legally separated, but end if you were divorced. So one big motivation for legal separations used to be, we're trying to keep health insurance for both spouses. And so that was a very good reason to do a legal separation. Unfortunately, nowadays it's far less likely that health insurance will continue if you're legally separated. In most cases, most health insurance plans that we see, you can't cover your spouse anymore if you go through a legal separation. So in that sense, it's just like a divorce. So that's something to be aware of. When you meet with a divorce lawyer about weighing the pros and cons between legal separation and divorce, they can help you learn how to dig into your plan and find out if this might be an option for you. Unfortunately, in most cases, again, it's not. The health insurance for your spouse ends with legal separation, just like it ends with divorce. Now, some other reasons that people choose to do a legal separation. A lot of times it's for religious reasons. So if someone's religious beliefs don't support the idea of divorce, but they also no longer want to be actively in their marriage. They want to live separately. They want their finances separate. They want the benefit of a parenting plan that's predetermined so that they each know how to meet and live up to their responsibilities to their children and their co-parent. That's a very common reason for a legal separation. And in fact, I would say now that the health insurance option is less likely, probably religious or ideological beliefs is the reason that most people do a legal separation instead of a divorce. That said, the vast majority of people do not do a legal separation. They move forward with a divorce. This is another thing that's very different in Connecticut than in other states. In a lot of states, you're required to go through a legal separation period before your divorce. And I think that can be one of the things that's confusing. As you're contemplating divorce and you're doing your due diligence on the internet, sometimes the articles that you're reading, while accurate in the state that the writers in aren't accurate in our state here in Connecticut. So you don't have to go through a legal separation in order to get divorced. In fact, you don't even have to live separately in order to get divorced. But there is the legal separation option that exists for people, and it's primarily used when someone has an ideological or religious preference to not be unmarried. So abandonment and desertion are two of the traditional grounds for divorce. So again, it used to be that the state's interest, this is a lawyer term for what the government is trying to suggest the best possible behavior for society and families is, right? So the bias used to be that they wanted marriages to stay intact, and that just no longer wanting to be married was not back then a valid reason for getting a divorce. It is now. That's what no-fault divorce is. But back when we only had fault divorce, abandonment and desertion were two of the fault grounds that would enable a judge to dissolve your marriage, that the state said were good enough reasons for you to no longer be married if someone abandoned you or deserted you for a period of years. These grounds still exist in Connecticut, but they're in the for-fault category. And for a variety of reasons, filing a divorce on for-fault grounds, most people, it doesn't make the most sense for them because there is so much work involved with proving that abandonment or desertion that it's not worth it. It's easier to just file your divorce under the no-fault ground of irretrievable breakdown of the marriage with no hope of reconciliation. And it's just a more straightforward path. You're allowed now to get divorced because of that. You don't have to any longer prove that someone abandoned or deserted you. Now, it is true that sometimes, it's rare, but sometimes an abandonment or a desertion might be something that gets talked about even in a no-fault divorce. For example, if someone's behavior really hurt their spouse, if they left and took all the money or something like that, I would expect that that would get talked about in the divorce, either in court in front of a judge or in negotiations with the other side in order to figure out how to address that. How do you make the spouse who was left without the funds, etc., left with all the bills, left without the funds, how to make that, if not right, but how to address that as things get divided so that act upon the spouse is taken into consideration. So these sorts of things, these bad behavior, fault characteristics of divorce, they can sneak into no-fault divorces too. One of the things I always like to say about that, because I think that for many of our clients who've gone through something like an abandonment or where there's cheating or adultery, a lot of times they really want the judge to hear their story on that. And the truth is, the most important thing we can do for our clients is be completely candid. And unless there is some financial component to the bad thing that the spouse did, it's probably not going to really be given a lot of weight by the court. Marriages are funny things. They're personal things, they're emotional things. And then there are also things where you have a lawyer and accountants and financial planners trying to do all of these things. It's emotional, it's personal, and then it's legal and financial. There's a lot going on. And spouse's bad behavior really isn't for the courtroom. Most people, even when someone did something objectively wrong or objectively cruel, the place to work through that is generally not in the context of the divorce itself, but in your work with your individual therapist to get over it, in your decisions about how you want to live your life in the future and not have this person in it. At Freed Marcroft, we are here to explain to you all the nuances of what the fault divorce is, what the no-fault divorce is. Since we have both options in Connecticut, which is a little bit rare, we're happy to take you through how all of that works and help you come to the best decision for you and your family.